So let's kick off then, David, with the first kind of overview, which is kind of when flavonoids historically came to people's attention, kind of you know, under what circumstances, what was known about them, and then really when quercetin kind of came to the top of the pack, because I suppose that's my perception of it, and kind of where your background and involvement came from initially in them.
Right. So in the mid 1980s, we had started publishing papers on how exercise affected the immune system. And as we got going in that area, we soon found out that like running marathons increased illness rates during the week or two after. And we showed that the immune system had transient dysfunction after running the marathon or an ultra marathon or heavy training. And so the Gatorade Sports Science Institute read our papers, and then they said, hey, we think that if the athlete uses carbohydrate during exercise, it will help attenuate some of what you're reporting, especially the inflammation. So we conducted many, many studies looking at taking about 60 grams of sugar per hour of exercise. That's like a liter of sports drink per hour. And we did show that inflammation was knocked down about 40%, but many other parts of the immune system were not affected. So then Gatorade said, well, let's start adding some things to the sports beverage. And they were interested in minerals and vitamins and fish oil and many things like that. And right about that time, the military contacted us, and they had been reading our papers, and they invited me to some of their symposiums to present my data. And then they said that they'd been looking at quercetin. Now, this was way back in like 2004, and I had never even heard of quercetin. And so they explained that this is a flavonoid. You can find it in the skin of apples. It's in many fruits. And it was being produced by Merck, a drug company in Brazil. And they had a plantation where they grew Uncaria, a plant that had come from Malaysia. And the leaves of that plant, it's kind of like a tea plant, and the leaves were very rich in quercetin. And so Merck had been extracting the quercetin and purifying it. And so the military said, we have that product, and we'd like for you to compete for some funding through DARPA and then start looking into this. So it actually took 2 years of competing for the money. We finally got $1.2 million from DARPA in their peak soldier performance program to look at quercetin. The concern was that warfighters would go on missions. They wouldn't eat very good. They would carry heavy packs and exercise heavily. They wouldn't sleep well. And at the military conferences, the doctors were saying that the warfighters were coming home sick, burnt out, with low immunity, and they were interested in some kind of a countermeasure, something the warfighters could take. Well, they also explained that the most common thing that the warfighters were taking was ibuprofen. And we had done some research at the Western States 100-mile race showing that ibuprofen causes leakage in the intestine with some bacteria getting into the bloodstream, amplifying inflammation. It actually was making it worse. So combining ibuprofen and heavy exertion wasn't working. It was not acting as an anti-inflammatory. And so the military was aware of my research in that area, and they were interested in a substitute, something that could act like ibuprofen and help the immune system hang in there during missions and keep the warfighters from getting sick. So we conducted, it took 2 years of studies, and the sum and substance of this is we learned a lot. The big thing we learned is, see, one apple has about 8 to 10 milligrams of quercetin. Well, DARPA thought, well, if 8 or 10 milligrams is good, well, maybe giving 1,000 milligrams, like 100 apples worth, would even be better. And we learned first that you can't treat flavonoids like a drug. Mother Nature throws a certain amount into fruits and vegetables, and then if you just take in mega doses, it doesn't work well. The second thing we learned in those studies is you need to mix the flavonoids with other flavonoids. There's 6 subclasses of flavonoids, and we found it's better to mix the flavonoids, not to have one in mega doses. The other thing we learned, though, that when we had people take quercetin, it did reduce respiratory illnesses by about 40–50%. So it did reduce illness. It improved viral defense, but it didn't act as an anti-inflammatory. That was our big surprise. It wasn't acting like an anti-inflammatory in a megadose. So then after the DARPA studies were over, we were contacted by some companies to continue this research. That's when we started mixing the flavonoids and instantly found much better success. And then at the same time, I ended up going to the North Carolina Research Campus. This is a campus that uses cutting-edge technologies like metabolomics and lipidomics and proteomics. And we began to study the whole system of the body and its response to exercise while they took flavonoid mixtures. So then that led to the whole series of studies where we worked on these new mixtures. We used a bilberry extract, which is rich in anthocyanins, and then we used quercetin, and then we also use green tea and combine those with fish oil. The reason we added fish oil is there's research showing that, for example, when quercetin and fish oil are consumed together, that they have a better anti-inflammatory response than if you just consume either one alone. We also found that caffeine, there's literature that shows that the green tea extract, the flavonoids in that are better absorbed and more bioactive with the caffeine. And then also vitamin C. We found very quickly in some research we did in our lab that if you combine the quercetin and the vitamin C while you eat it together, you have a very quick peak of the quercetin in the blood. It enhances the absorption in the small intestine better than if you don't use it. So with all of that, we created this nutrient flavonoid mixture and then did a series of studies using that. And we've done a metabolic chamber study looking at energy expenditure. We showed that using that combination versus placebo increased your resting metabolic rate by about 50 calories a day. That's enough over a year to add substantially to weight loss, fat loss. We also did another study with that mixture showing that if you walk or run after you've been using that supplement for a couple weeks, that most of the flavonoids go to our gut. And in the gut, the bacteria transform them into what we call gut-derived phenolics. Basically, it takes the parent flavonoid molecules, which are kind of complex, and then the bacteria will chomp them up into little pieces that then can get repackaged, get back into your circulation and tissues, and then exert beneficial effects. And we found that combining walking and running with consumption of these mixed flavonoids, the gold condition, that it ended up with more of those beneficial phenolics circulating in the blood. That was a very important study. First, it was a very novel finding. No one has ever shown that before, that people who exercise and eat extra flavonoids, you get a better bang for your flavonoids if you do it that way. We then also showed that, and this is, I think, the most exciting research, is there is a new understanding of inflammation. What we're learning is that immune cells create kind of a factory for inflammation in them. We call it the inflammasome. If that gets activated, you have a very large post-exercise inflammation response. We showed that flavonoid nutrient mixture, the gold condition, almost completely knocked out not only the activation of the inflammasome, but the inflammatory response for a whole day was knocked down significantly when taking the flavonoid mixture. So in DARPA, when we had huge amounts of quercetin all by itself, it didn't work as an anti-inflammatory. When we created the flavonoid nutrient mixture, it operated wonderfully as an anti-inflammatory, and we're very, very excited about those data, and those data have been published.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that. That's perfect, actually, for a lot of what our purposes are. One question I had is, when you obviously discovered that quercetin didn't necessarily act as an anti-inflammatory in the way that you thought it would, what was the process of determining that, all right, well, add bilberry, add green tea, and then it will? I mean, that doesn't sound like it's necessarily that easy to come to that conclusion. So what did the work look like to make that, to come to those conclusions?
Right, and that is an excellent question because it took years to figure that out. A lot, as you know, when it comes to all of this, you have to balance cost, availability, along with effectiveness. And green tea and bilberry and quercetin, these are three different types of sources of flavonoids. Quercetin is quercetin, the bilberry is anthocyanins, and the green tea is catechins. There was research showing that when those types of flavonoids were combined, that there were synergistic effects, bioactive effects. And that occurred in cell studies and animal studies and then in human studies. And so that helped us as we were looking at the best combination to take a look at. And then the nutrients, these adjuvants, the vitamin C, the caffeine, the fish oil, also the literature was emerging. So we kept up with the literature and then put these together in the best amounts and mixtures that we thought would work based on that literature, and then conducted studies with gold condition and indeed found out that it worked great.
And how many different kind of combinations did you have to work through then to kind of get to the, if you like, the golden ticket of having everything, you know, perfect, in perfect alignment?
Quite a bit. I mean, early on, we started with mega doses of quercetin, and then we started adding some green tea to the quercetin and some fish oil to that. And then the final piece was adding the bilberry extract, the anthocyanins. The reason for that is the anthocyanins have some very special effects in humans. It has effects on cognition, effects on long-term health of our nerves, and it prevents Alzheimer's disease and senility later on in life. Anthocyanins have been found to actually get into the brain tissue. They have traced it. You can put tracers on it and follow it. And then in the brain, it exerts all of these effects. And so we knew we had to put that in there because of those effects. And indeed, we have found that combination increases your metabolism, increases your feeling of energy, and then it acts as an anti-inflammatory at the same time.
That's great. One thing that people have been really interested in is the presence of fish oil. Partly because if there wasn't fish oil, then maybe there would be a vegetarian or vegan alternative. There was an omega-3 alternative. Can you explain why those other alternatives aren't necessarily appropriate for this particular use or dose? Or it'd be helpful for people to understand, because it is, aside from that, it's a plant-based supplement.
Right. So the research showing that flavonoids with fish oil acts as a better anti-inflammatory than either one alone, that is what drove that. But at the same time, there is increasing data that humans need DHA, one of the main components of fish oil, in our diet for long-term brain health. And some people don't like to eat fish or seafood. And because of the importance of the anti-inflammatory effect and also long-term cognitive effects, we felt that it should be included in the supplement. And this is good for people who just won't touch seafood. This then allows them to get the DHA and the EPA for their long-term health.
Right. But they don't, without having to obviously eat fish to do it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is it true that the GO condition just wouldn't be as effective if you had another form of omega-3 and you wouldn't get the cognitive benefits either? That's the...
We believe that to be the case based on our studies and the literature, that we would need to do a head-to-head comparison on different outcome measures and look at the GO condition with it and without it. Based on everything we know, we predict that the anti-inflammatory effect would not be as strong, and perhaps the long-term cognitive health would not be as good either.
Right.
But this would be an expensive study where you would have to divide a big group into those receiving it with or without the fish oil versus placebo, so really 3 groups, and then take a look at that. Sometimes, we have to go with the literature, our findings, and balance everything. And I'm confident that we have the right formulation.
That's great. Now, you mentioned before that when you walk or you perform athletics, essentially GO condition actually begins to perform even better. Its performance is enhanced through that.
Yes. Yep.
And you kind of mentioned that once you've been taking it for 2 weeks, so is there some sort of background as to why that loading dose, if you like, of 2 weeks is particularly valuable?
Yeah, and that's another great question. We again looked at the literature, and it takes a while for the increased flavonoid consumption. So you eat flavonoids, let's say you start eating GO condition every day. So then on day one, the quercetin and the anthocyanins from the bilberry and the catechins from the green tea will go, most of it, to the colon. The small intestine doesn't absorb much. There, the bacteria break it down, and then there will be a little bit of return back into the system. But there's a loading effect. You have to do it the next day. And then finally, the colon, after days have gone by, is getting more and more of the substrate in, allowing the bacteria to multiply. They have to actually multiply, and then they start breaking it down faster, and you get more and more into your system. And then on the other end, it goes to the liver repackages, and it sends it out in the blood to the tissue. It takes a while on the other end for receptors to receive it and then use it and to have the bioactivity. And so there's a lot of interest on the time course of how long this all takes. And we feel the literature supports that 2 weeks is a sweet spot, that's about the optimal loading zone for then these effects to get going.
Fantastic. So when you first take Go Condition, because it has 50 milligrams of caffeine, you're going to feel a sense of just alertness that naturally comes from that. But actually over time, so after 2 weeks and with exercise, that's when you really kind of get the amplification of the effects.
Yeah, from the flavonoids. Yeah. That more and more of those beneficial little pieces will come out of the colon. It's interesting. I think it's one of the biggest stories of flavonoids is you eat it, but we can't really use those flavonoids very well until our gut microbiome breaks it down so we could use it. I tell people it's just like a tree. The leaves fall down to the ground, and the tree roots would love to eat the nutrients in the leaves, but it takes the bacteria in the soil breaking down the leaves, and then finally the root hairs can use the nutrients in the leaves again. That's exactly what happens when we eat flavonoids, that we have to have bacteria breaking it down in order for the body to use the beneficial pieces of the flavonoids. The parent molecule is too big and too complex and a bit too reactive. You wouldn't want to inject flavonoids straight into your blood. This would not be a good thing. We have to have it pass through the gut first.
Right. And so do the flavonoids themselves in those first 2 weeks, they're essentially, I suppose, and this may be my wrong interpretation, but they're somewhat feeding the colon so that the colon can generate the bacteria it needs to actually then process them well. Is that the effect?
They're feeding, what did you say?
They're kind of, their presence in the colon is the thing that causes the colon to produce the bacteria that then the bacteria needed in numbers to actually then process the flavonoids.
Exactly. Yep. So, we all have different types of bacteria and viruses and fungi in our colon. So then you increase a certain type of substrate to the colon, and then the bacteria that love that substrate and eat it will multiply like crazy in response to the extra substrate. And that's exactly what happens. And what's interesting is the bacteria that like the flavonoids are the ones with the white hats on, the good ones. And they multiply, and that's why all these beneficial pieces are produced that circulate through the body, producing beneficial effects. And that's why people who eat a lot of flavonoids tend to have less heart disease, certain types of cancer reduced, diabetes is reduced, less senility, and better newer cognitive effects. And performance is affected. They act as an anti-inflammatory, antioxidative effect. So all of these beneficial things that come from this wonderful process of more flavonoids, more gut bacteria producing the pieces that float around. And then if you exercise on top of it, you get an even greater return from those flavonoids being in the gut. So it's a wonderful thing. This entire story, if it's said right, I think the public will be very compelled. When I give talks out in the public, they really eat this up. They really like the sound of the gut microbiome playing a role in this because they've all heard about it, and this is an example of how it works.
I do think it's really interesting that as you say, the gut micro there is a real serendipitous loop there where the gut microbiome itself is responding positively to the thing that, yep. And then it replicates dramatically, which then enables it to actually, synthesize it and use it just that much better. When it's like it's a very virtuous circle.
Yeah, it's just like bacteria and worms. I don't know if you compost much. I do all the time. I mean, the return, you put compost into soil and it enriches the soil. And it's the exact same thing that goes on in our gut when we eat flavonoids.
Which caused me to ask a couple of other questions then. I know the dosing is really important, and you mentioned that if you injected it, that would be a bad thing, and I'm assuming it would be poisonous to some extent.
It's actually genotoxic. But the flavonoid pair molecules are big and complex and have many hydroxyl groups, and that can actually cause changes in the DNA. So, early on, first discovered and talked about this is 20, 30 years ago, there was worry. In fact, even when we were doing the DARPA studies and the quercetin, we were using 1,000 milligrams of quercetin, there was a lot of worry from reviewers that would be genotoxic, that it would hurt the DNA because it was too much. But we didn't understand at that point that all of that genotoxic quercetin was going to the colon, most of it, and being transformed into something the body could safely use. And so it took a while for us to figure that out. So there's this built-in protection. The small intestine looks at it and says, nope, we're not taking you in. And then it goes to the colon, and bacteria say, we like to eat this. They eat it, multiply, produce little pieces that come out, and then help us. It's a wonderful story.
That's great. And it sounds like there's a story beyond even the flavonoid because of that process in the gut microbiome. There's a beneficial that sits even outside of what we would think about specifically for gut conditioning.
Yeah, well, it's like you put compost in the soil, everything gets benefited. The bacteria and the worms multiply, the soil gets better, and then our crops get better, and then we get better as we eat the crops. I mean, it's just like everything is beneficial in every which way you look at it. That's what happens with flavonoids when we eat more bilberry and green tea and the quercetin, which is found in apples and many other fruits, grapes, etc.
That's neat. So when we were kind of looking into the history of flavonoids, one of the things we discovered was they were originally called vitamin P back in the 1950s.
Yeah.
That designation didn't last. Well, I suppose that was the 30s, and that designation had gone away by the 1950s, as people understand.
Yeah, and really the modern era of flavonoids, it's all parallel with the increased technology that has been developed. So to really measure the little pieces that come out of the colon, you need to have very sophisticated mass spectrometers. And those kinds of mass spectrometers have only been available in the last 10, 20 years. at the North Carolina Research Campus, we have one of the world's leading experts, Dr. Colin Kay, who can measure those gut phenolics. And we've been publishing papers with him, and indeed the gold condition study where we showed that walking, running with the supplement produced more of that. That study was done with him. So to measure this, it takes a very sophisticated mass spec platform, and that's only been relatively recent. So a lot of the early research on flavonoids was very misdirected. There was cell culture and some animal, but a lot of cell culture, and it was so misleading. I tell people that I don't hardly even look at cell culture studies in this area because you expose the cells to like quercetin. Well, the body never sees quercetin. It sees a transformed quercetin, not the original. So you can't even pay attention to those studies that use the parent molecule.
Yeah. One of the things that we're, obviously for us in trying to explain the products to people that maybe are relatively sophisticated around supplements and curious about supplements, but haven't necessarily had an experience with a product like Go Condition, because Go Condition is like a non-nutrient supplement as such. And I think people understand macronutrients, they understand micronutrients, and even things like adaptogens and other things. But the idea of a non-nutrient is hard to get your head around, especially things like that's so important in the diet. How do you generally address that misunderstanding or non-understanding?
Well, to me, the best analogy is dietary fiber. So I'm sure you remember in the 1960s when the hippies in San Francisco were saying you need to use fiber. And a lot of the nutritionists at that time said that's just ridiculous because the fiber isn't used by the body, it just passes through. And so you don't really need it in your diet. Well, they were so wrong. The hippies were right that time, not right, not right another thing. And basically we found that non-nutrient, it does a lot of the same things. It gets to the colon. It is not absorbed in the small intestine, and the bacteria multiply as it breaks down the fiber, and certain parts of that breakdown actually get back in the body and produce beneficial effects. And then it also improves the health of the colon. It improves the lining cell health. So to me, there's no better analogy than dietary fiber. It's a non-nutrient, but it's vital to our health in many ways. And what gets to the colon doesn't always stay in the colon. Some of it gets back in and produces beneficial effects. So it isn't like waste material. It's way more than that.
And that's neat. Thank you. One of the things about Go Condition and some of the charts that you've shown us is that it delivers a dose of 500 milligrams, or more or less 500 milligrams of flavonoids over 2 capsules taken during one day.
Well, so 4 capsules is I got to look at the arithmetic again. It's isn't it 600 and something? But 2 capsules.
I have my bottle here says per capsule I have 104 milligrams of wild bilberry, 90 milligrams of green tea, and 50 milligrams of quercetin.
And see, the question is that the flavonoid milligrams or the extract milligrams? So if you read our papers, in fact, I can give you the exact amount here. It's in the slides. So if you have 2 capsules, you get 329 milligrams of pure flavonoids.
Right.
If you have 4 capsules, you get 658.
Right.
Yeah.
And so how does that, so essentially that's the usable amount, is that correct? From the,
That's the pure flavonoids. So the extracts have some other things in them. So the flavonoid portion, 2 capsules, will be 329. Now, the average person is getting some flavonoids in their diet already. So basically what we're promoting is you have a background amount in the diet, which is way too low. Then you add 2 capsules of BioNuvo. It should get most people up in the 400, 500 area
right.
that we want them to be.
Got it. And why then, why is it not necessarily the case that more is better when it comes to flavonoids? Because looking at some of those charts, the benefits kind of taper off.
Yeah.
They don't really increase that much after 500 milligrams.
Yeah, there's some good research that, like just about everything in life, enough is enough, and way more isn't better. Now, we think that 2 capsules is great for most people to receive all of the health benefits, and we showed that walking every day and taking 2 capsules of the gold position increased the gut phenolics to a level that's consistent with long-term health. So that's the bulk of people. But we think that others, for example, people who want to lose weight, in the chamber, we use 4 capsules a day and showed that that was enough to increase metabolism 50 calories a day. And then that's 350 a week. And then by the end of the month, you're starting to knock on half a pound of body fat per month, roughly, a little bit under. And so for people trying to lose weight, then 4 capsules may be good. And for athletes, because of the oxidative stress and inflammation, we used 4 capsules in the athlete studies. And that got them up to 630 or so milligrams, and that was enough to knock out the inflammation and oxidative stress.
Right. Okay. That is helpful. Thank you very much. When you talk about the literature around the whole subject, just so that we kind of frame it up right, there's general literature about quercetin, as it were, that is kind of generally available, and then there's very specific peer-reviewed studies and things like that. So, is it true to say that a lot of the if you like, the research around how to formulate the compound was derived from published peer-reviewed literature that was kind of available, generally available, and then you took that and applied it, and then essentially applied your own clinical trials to that? Is that how?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
So the way for us to view the literature is really part of, and I'm a complete layman, but part of your job is actually just to consume the literature, at scale, so you actually understand how to formulate the things that you're.
Exactly right. I mean, we go to conferences, we review scientific papers, we read scientific papers, we're on journal boards and review new studies coming out. And so, yeah, we're on top of this literature and rubbing shoulders with leaders in this field. And that's what it takes. You have to be immersed in this line of research to really understand how to best put something together.
That makes sense. And then a couple of other things, and we filled our time incredibly quickly, so thank you for that. But a couple of other things. We got a little bit of pushback from our lawyers for using the term bioactive and activation in the body. What is a helpful layman's definition of what bioactive is, and why is that important specifically when it relates to these kinds of things?
Yeah. So when the gut microbiome produces these little smaller molecules, we call them gut-derived phenolics, they get out into the body and they'll circulate for hours. and then the kidney starts to clear them and put them in the urine. That's why we have to eat it every day. So it's a summation effect because the body's clearing them on a regular basis. So while those gut phenolics are moving around the body, they then connect with receptors and with different cells to produce various actions. We call that bioactivity. And that's the term for the anti-inflammatory effect, the antioxidative stress effect, the cognitive effect. And so that is bioactivity. There's no other way to frame it. So I'm surprised that there would be pushback because this latest study with the inflammasome and showing that gold condition just knocked that out. I mean, that's bioactivity personified. It's just a wonderful result.
So how would you describe then the if you like, how flavonoids, once they've been transformed in that way, you know, how they go about doing their work at the cellular level? What's the latest thinking on that?
It's like the wonderful soil produced by worms and bacteria that make our crops grow better because everything can use what is the end product of the bacterial breakdown. And that's what it is. Our receptors in the body can use these molecules, and it generates these healthful responses now. So what was once kind of a harmful genotoxic parent molecule has become this wonderful thing that the body needs. Because the data in this area are unbelievable. The long-term studies showing that people who are in the 400, 500 milligrams of flavonoids a day or more, the health benefits, the increase in longevity, the decrease in death rate for most of the common diseases, study after study after study is showing this. It's a remarkably consistent body of literature. Humans have to have flavonoids. It's what I also feel is humans must have DHA. And unfortunately, you can eat like almonds and walnuts and seeds that have what is called omega-3, plant omega-3. We call it alpha-linolenic acid, ALA. But then humans cannot transform that very well to DHA, which is the type of omega-3 fat that the body loves. Humans don't do that very well. So more and more researchers are saying you have to eat the DHA straight. And so flavonoids go through a different process. We have to have flavonoids for human health. But thank goodness we have bacteria in the colon that turn them into good things that the body can benefit from and then reduce disease. Those gut-derived phenolics are also antiviral. They actually have antiviral effects. We have published data on that. And there is some new thinking. There's some papers out that people who eat a lot of flavonoids and have a lot of gut phenolics in their blood may be less prone to COVID-19. And we'll see how that area of research develops. We showed that people who eat 3 servings of fruit a day have a significant reduction, independent of everything, in the common cold, the number of days you're sick with a common cold. So those gut-derived phenolics have antiviral effects. And so more and more, every which way you look at it, humans need flavonoids for good health. And so that's the story that somehow has to get out there. And if you tie it into the microbiome, I think people, they like the new thing. See, this is the new area of nutrition. It's the frontier. It's the brand new area. And it's an exciting area. It's gotten just about as much buzz as dietary fiber did back in the 70s and 80s as researchers jumped onto it and discovered all the benefits. That's where we are right now with flavonoids.
Awesome. Okay, well, David, you are literally right up on our time. Have I asked every intelligent question that I could have asked, or have we missed anything out?
No, you said you haven't interviewed. You did a great job.
Well, that's neat. That's really helpful. I think we've got a good understanding and some really good stuff to edit out of that and use. So thank you very much. From your perspective, is it okay if we use this on our website and in social media and various other places?
Yep. Of course. Yep. Yep.
Cool. Okay. Well, once we've cut and diced it a little bit, we'll let you see kind of what we've got, so you don't get any nasty surprises. Should
okay.
A relative say, "Hey, I've just seen you on Facebook," make sure that we know that's coming.
Yep. No problem.
Cool.
Glad to help.
All right. Well, look, thank you very much.
Okay.
Hey, thank you so much. This was awesome.
All right. Great. Nice to meet both of you guys.
And you.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.